Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what may or may not be the last meeting of Governmental Affairs. We're kind of hoping it is, so we got a busy calendar today. We're going to start off members of the committee with Senate Bill 430 by Senator Matt Brass. Senator Brass, you ready?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Got Senate Bill 430, and simply what it does is bring up the minimum salaries of our constitutional officers. We're adjusting that minimum based on the cost of living adjustments that they've received since 2006. We're simply updating the code. As some of y'all that were in subcommittee can remember, there was also an additional 5% raise on that minimum, but that has been taken out. So this simply just updates the code on those constitutional officers. And there was a committee sub, and I'm looking at LC 450118S, but line 23 that said plus any cost of living adjustments, that was taken. We've taken that out because it's redundant based on if you look in subsection or in section 1, subsection B, where it says of this code section, it is covered with that. So the Constitutional Officers Association and ACCG has worked that out, and I think everybody's in agreement.
All right, I want to, and it's not time to amend the substitute, but is it your position that any place within this
Yes, sir.
118S that we see plus any cost of living adjustment adjusted, that should be scratched?
Yes, sir, that is correct. So it'd be on page 3, line 67.
What about on line 89 there?
Line 89, we could strike through there as well. Line 120.
Right. And for members of the committee, the purpose in striking that line, we were concerned with some unintended consequences of that.
Yes, sir.
Briefly talk about the unintended consequences and why we're removing this.
So we thought there might be some counties out there that we were unaware of that might not have done the cost of living adjustments, and we certainly didn't want to hurt them. And so, in talking with the chairman, and we wanted to address those concerns. So.
Right, and there's one other provision in the substitute that's been added. If you'll go ahead and talk about that. Do we have an amendment on that? I want to say it's section 11 for members of the committee, page 8. That Senator Millar
yes,
has some
sir.
concerns about that, as well as Representative Hansen.
Yes, sir, and I actually haven't seen that language yet. Would it be the will of the chairman and the committee if I could bring up Senator Millar to
Absolutely.
discuss that?
Absolutely. And was there anybody out there, was there additional amendment on something like that that said by CEO form of government anyway? ACCG?
I don't have the language.
Hold on, Senator. Anybody here from ACCG?
We're here, but we didn't do an amendment for that. Representative Fleming had mentioned it, but we didn't do the amendment.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Millar, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Basically, Section 11, back in 2001, the General Assembly, when I was here, we passed legislation saying that county governments could, at the time, they can set their own salaries. And I didn't happen to vote for it, but we did pass it at that time. And we just recently had a situation here in DeKalb where the commissioners have given themselves a raise, which is their right. They're allowed to give themselves a raise. And in the current law, it turns out there's a loophole that if you do it prior to qualifying, what happens after the November election, then it would be effective January the 1st. Back in 2001, we didn't take into effect that they're staggered terms. So the net effect is we have people that are currently in office giving themselves a raise during their current term. And what the amendment does says, if you're in office when this passes, you can't get it until your term expires. So, for example, in DeKalb, we've got 3 commissioners who's got an election coming up in November, okay? And if they are elected, they will get this raise that they passed themselves as of January the 1st, which is certainly their right. The other 4, plus the CEO of the county, do not come up till 2020 election. And if they're still in office at that time, then they would get this raise. I realize this disparity, but I don't think there's anybody in this room. There wasn't in the Senate. There was actually a separate bill in the Senate to limit their raise in the local delegation by the complete Senate delegation. I said, well, wait a minute. You know, we gave them the authority to do it. If they want to give themselves a 60% raise, we can't really argue about that. But everybody agrees in the Senate delegation, and the other bill stopped, that nobody should get a raise during the middle of their term. We can't do it to ourselves, and nobody should be allowed to do that in public office. And that's what the amendment does, sir.
Questions from members of the committee? Representative Oliver.
Assuming you're right for this discussion, why wouldn't it be the continuing authority or obligation of the county commissioners to make this correction themselves? Why are we doing it here? Why aren't they doing this correction if they agree with you?
I don't know if they agree with me or not. I think some of them probably don't agree with me. But the point being, I think the bottom line is for us as legislators, I mean, we can't give ourselves a raise. And I don't know anybody. I've had nobody except for one commissioner come to me and say this isn't right because, you know, you're going to have people getting paid different amounts of money. I say, well, it's also not right that somebody give themselves a raise. Sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Does Section 11 apply to all counties?
Yes, ma'am. No, it's all, no, I'm not trying to penalize just a cap. I believe this is a loophole in the law. A loophole in the law that needs to be fixed.
And if we agreed with you, it would apply, we're changing the law for the other 158 counties in addition to the county.
Yeah, but again, I would say to you, I have had no one come to me from any of the other counties that doesn't think that this is not, it's not right to give yourself a raise. That's the bottom line. It should be uniform. We've got 180 representatives, and we've also got 56 senators, and we can't give ourselves a raise during our current term of office.
Representative Powell, Chairman Powell. Chairman J. Powell.
I know that your intention is to correct what you see as an oversight, but aren't you destroying to some degree some uniformity because all local governments were both cities and counties have that same language, and now you're making counties be treated different than cities? Why didn't you fix both of them?
Some people said that to me. I told them I had no problem in bringing an amendment to do that.
Okay.
No, I have no objection to that whatsoever.
Chairman Powell, is there an easy amendment that you see that can be added to this particular language to provide the uniformity that you seek?
No, because I don't know the code section that has to be. I mean, you do the same thing to the municipal code section, but I don't know what it is.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Please.
I would have no problem if someone wants to amend this on the floor, if it makes it to the floor, to do what the chairman has just suggested.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Taylor. Chairman Taylor.
Senator Miller, I guess my question would be, as the municipalization, tough word, goes, of the county continues, the county commissioners actually have fewer responsibilities because we've taken 175,000 people out of that out of the county's jurisdiction that have most of those services provided by cities now. Do you think there's any rationale for a raise? These are part-time positions, am I not correct?
They are part-time positions, but the General Assembly has given them the authority, and I'm not trying to take that away, that they can give themselves a raise of any amount of money they want. And the voters will decide whether or not they think that's outrageous or not. So, no, and I don't want to get debate about who works harder and that kind of thing. I mean, this particular raise goes from in this particular county goes from $42,000 to about $64,000, and which means they work 4 times harder than you and me. But I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I agreed to the amendment when it was brought to me for the interest of the committee because I do see it problematic. I didn't want to necessarily make it DeKalb specific, but I did see it problematic to be able to give yourself a raise in the middle of your term instead of the next preceding term, and that's why I agreed to it. At this time, the chair will entertain Representative Mosby.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
So you said the entire Senate delegation was the DeKalb?
Yes,
Senate.
I spoke to Senator, the chair of the delegation. They had can I answer that, Mr. Chairman? Go ahead, Nate. I'm sorry. the entire Senate delegation brought me an amendment to limit the raise to 10%. Ironically, if these commissioners hang around and get elected again in 2020, they're going to make more money by what I'm doing versus what the Senate delegation wanted to do to them. But I went back to the fact the law right now that has that right, and I'm not trying to violate that principle.
All right, thank you. Are we concerned at all, I'm just talking out loud for members of the committee, are we concerned at all if we don't pass this provision that we could be sending a message to all municipalities, talking about the uniformity, and the counties, that if you want to give yourself a raise in the middle of your term, that's okay with us? Representative Oliver?
I'm trying to figure out procedurally, when this bill, because I'm remembering the long conversation we had about the constitutional officers, and I don't remember it passing out of that committee, or was there a split vote on that? I remember voting no because I never understood it. What
Well,
happened?
Chairman Powell, you passed it out, did you not?
We did. We amended and took out the 5% raise language and passed it out as a substitute.
All right. Discretion of the chair time, y'all, because we've got 5 or 6 things on here, so I'm going to ask for a motion on this particular piece of legislation at this time. Got a motion to pass. Do I hear a second? Second? Second as amendment. Thank you so much. At this time, any discussion?
So is it amended or not?
Yes, as committee substitute, would it not be?
Yeah.
Yes, committee substitute. Got a first?
We never adopted the
Hold
amendment.
on. I love it. Legislative Council half the time says everything passed out of committee substitute with a substitute should be called committee of substitute. But I'm going to defer. We've got a committee substitute as amended, motion and seconded. Any discussion?
The amendment is to delete plus any cost of living.
This, to delete any cost of living. Correct.
That language
In every section. Correct, Senator Brass?
So that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of passing the committee substitute as amended will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. All right, we've got it amended. Who's going to carry it?
We're still working on that, Mr. Chairman, but we've got,
Representative Oliver?
Representative,
That's a joke. That's
Representative,
Taylor?
we've got confirmation, Representative Shaw Blackman.
You have a question? All right.
Congratulations. Payment rules.
Senate Bill 363.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Did we not do that? Jay, did we do it? We did.
Yeah.
Approve a substitute as amended. That's correct. All right. Do note that. Anybody else want to record a no vote on that who didn't understand the procedure?
Yes.
Okay.
Here, a no vote.
All right. We got 3 Dems and 2 Dems over here. What? I'm just trying to make it easier on him. I actually don't, but okay. No, we've taken that, and they're going to go back for the purposes of the record, and I just want to make sure that we do that. If not, get with Craig immediately following. Thank you. Senate Bill 363. We got a motion to pass. I love it, but do you want to present real quick?
I can, Mr. Chairman, but if I got a motion to pass, I'll shut up. But I'll do whatever you like, Mr. Chairman.
This is not new to the committee. What this does is makes the time uniform.
Yes, sir, that's correct. It closes all polls at 7 p.m. Also, that's in section 2. Section 1, you'll see that allows for the early voting to be tabulated 1 hour earlier than closing, but still remain confidential until closing.
And the other section is a section we voted on before out of this committee that says pick one Saturday or one Sunday. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes. Who is that?
Can you turn this on? It's 25.
Thank
My
you.
light's not working.
25, see if that works.
Okay. Can you hear me? No, it's still not on. I can just talk loud, it's fine. Okay.
I don't think so, Craig.
Oh,
I know that doesn't.
no.
Just
Don't press the gray button.
Okay. I have a question. This bill 363, can you tell me, did somebody ask you to bring the bill, or just why is the bill up? I wasn't on subcommittee, so I did have some questions about it. I did watch the subcommittee, but this was one of the questions I had when we were discussing it.
Sure.
So did someone?
Fulton County came to me with this bill,
Okay.
the county,
Anybody specifically within the county?
just representatives of the county.
House reps?
No, not House, just people that represent the county.
I had some discussions on it, and I just don't feel like it's appropriate to betray some of those people's confidence that they showed in me by saying they were concerned about it.
Well,
I mean, if you were to say something to me in confidence, I wouldn't quote you. I'm just saying in the conversations I had in my office, some of those were in confidence. I can't say whether that was the case with him or not, but
right,
I wouldn't
trying-
breach that confidence.
I was trying to distinguish
Well,
if it was election supervisors or just who. Because if it's somebody who's elected, that's a part of being elected. So, I mean, I'm
Well,
trying to distinguish if it's voters or if it's.
Well, just so we're clear, I'm a member of the Fulton County delegation, so it is something that I saw as a problem and presented the bill.
Representative Oliver?
The impact of this bill is to eliminate the extra hour of voting opportunity that's been granted to City of Atlanta voters. Is that correct?
It is to put everyone on equal footing to put it at 7 p.m. I have constituents that work in Atlanta and have to deal with the traffic within Atlanta, and then once they get out of that traffic, they have to deal with traffic getting 40, 50 miles home, and they are only allowed to vote until 7 p.m.
How many other cities other than the City of Atlanta extend voting hours to 8 p.m.?
0.
So this is an anti-voting rights for Atlanta bill.
No, ma'am, that's incorrect. Voting rights.
I'm
is-
sorry, we won't have any comments, or we'll remove you.
The spirit of the Voting Rights Act is one person, one vote. And one person should not be allowed to vote 1 hour longer than another person.
Who's number 27? Representative Wynn?
Thank you. Was there some consideration to extend the voting hour to 8 p.m. for everybody? That would address the uniformity, but also address the fact that, we put this into place in 1970 because of the population size, which has increased in Atlanta.
Correct. And our options were to extend an hour for 2,000 plus polling precincts, or we could do 172. So with 3 weeks of early voting, with one mandatory Saturday, possibly Sunday, and absentee ballots for any reason in the state of Georgia, there's ample time to vote.
Representative Wynn, I had part of those discussions as well, and we didn't want to put an unfunded mandate on all the other counties and the cities that this could apply to. And so that's why, making the whole state do something just because one place wanted to do it was part of that consideration. Additional questions, please. Representative Taylor.
Move call question.
Move to call the question. I agree with you. We got a motion to pass. Do I hear a second? Please.
Can we amend the bill?
Can you amend the bill?
Yes.
What is your amendment? I've asked for everybody to bring me amendments in advance. I don't plan on any surprise amendments today. But you may or may not be recognized.
In my current wisdom, I thought of something. So I'm just asking are you willing to?
Typically, I do not unless it's something that's been discussed in advance. Thank you. We got a motion and a second. All those in favor, any discussion?
Can I ask one more question? Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you said that Fulton County Elections Board, there was conversation. What about DeKalb Elections Board, as they also represent City of Atlanta and make decisions on behalf of voters as well? Did you have conversations with them?
I did not.
Can you just let me know why they weren't included in that conversation, though this does impact City of Atlanta, DeKalb County?
No one came to me and mentioned anything about DeKalb County.
Okay, just for the record, I got a letter of opposition from the Board of Elections from DeKalb County, just this morning.
And
And again, I had part of the discussion of that. I do think that some people would say it would be unfair in some elections in DeKalb to let people to vote later in certain parts of DeKalb, but not the rest of DeKalb. So if the part of DeKalb County that was open till 8, would they be upset the only other people only could vote till 7? And that was part of the issue that came up as well in that uniformity debate. But we do have a motion and a second on the table here. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign.
No.
Ayes clearly have it. All right. We do this every week. Y'all ready? All those against. Yes, calling the question. All those against, raise your hands. I've got 5. And 2 hands over there by Howard trying to game the system. Leave it up to him, he'd vote till 11. Okay. Thank you. House Bill 363 passes. Do you know who's going to carry that one? You'll let us know. Buzz Brockway?
yes, sir. I'm
Yes, sir.
sorry.
Buzz Brockway on that one. All right, Mr. Brass, you're moving a lot of stuff today.
I should have brought y'all lunch, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we'll give you that opportunity at the appropriate time. Senate Bill 404.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is pretty simple. It just doesn't allow county municipals or public water systems to charge any excess money for fire sprinkler water systems for the standby water. It does allow them to recoup the cost. We added an amendment in subcommittee that kind of further addressed that. They can still recoup their costs. They're just going to have to show it. So it adds a little more transparency to what's going on to make sure that the fire sprinkler standby water systems don't turn into a profit center. That's simply what the bill does.
All right. Chair will enter Representative Williamson.
So to the author of the bill, can you briefly describe to me what problem we're trying to solve here? And I apologize I hadn't approached you about this particular bill.
No problem, Representative. Simply, we're trying to make sure that people aren't, or that municipalities or water authorities aren't charging extra money, absorbent amounts for this standby water service that they have to provide for a fire sprinkler. We want, the idea, and you can see it in lines 12 and 13, is it explains the point of this, is we simply want to encourage the use of these fire sprinkler systems. And in doing so, we want to make sure that people aren't overcharging for that.
Mr. Williamson, I've had ongoing discussions about this, and this is supposed to be simple, but we've had people consistently ask us that let's not do a service and charge people so it become a profit center. We've got a few bad actors out there, and then we get cities and water systems and counties going, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So we thought this was the language that was tight enough that say if you have a complaint, then you're leaving it up to that local to prove why you charge what you charge. And as long as you can do that, you're covered.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might add, there are very few bad actors
Right.
in the state.
But it's a way for them to be able to do that they currently can't do as a way. Representative Chairman Powell, did you have your light on?
Yes, sir. The question came up about why. Is it not true that a lot of or some of the jurisdictions that provide water services, that they're charging these folks because they have separate meters that just go to the water, to the sprinkler systems? It's not used, but they're charging these folks sometimes some fairly exorbitant rates. There's one that we heard of, a certain church was being charged $270 a month just to have water run to a separate meter that would run the sprinkler system.
That is correct, Representative. Thank
All
you.
right, at this time, the chair will entertain a motion. Got a by sub, got a move to pass by sub. Any discussion? Do we need a second on that?
I second it.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
You're gonna ask me to show hands? All right, great, it passes. Senate Bill 404. Senator Brass, I think, am I right? I think your work here is done.
Yes, sir. Chairman Powell will be carrying this bill. Alan Powell.
Alan Powell. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for your time.
Look forward to that spirit of cooperation from the Senate.
Yes, sir.
Representative, Chairman Setzler. We've got a friendly little, voting machine bill, 403, and Senator Thompson. Y'all welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the chair's consideration for the hearing today. I'll let our good senator tee this up, and I'll walk through as it pleases the committee, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We bring before you Senate Bill 403. I think, as I said before, I think everybody in this building has had an opportunity to weigh in on this bill, and I appreciate the good representative, Mr. Chairman, sitting next to me that I've had the chance to work with on this, and I believe that we have come to an agreement today we're going to present to you. And what we seek to do, obviously, and he'll explain this, is to move our state in line with 70% of the rest of the country, and moving a little bit more towards paper ballot and be able to provide the opportunity for some audits. And so with that, I'm going to give as much time as I can to my good friend to my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, we bring before you today Senate Bill 403, LC version 288872S, 8872S. I want to speak to the underlying substitute that was amended through the process. From its original form, it was amended in committee in the Senate, amended in subcommittee, as we're trying to get it to a form that we feel like can move through the process with broad consensus. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to spend too much time, but I do want to be subject to questions from members of the committee. The first couple pages of the bill are definitions. In this case, the definitions are very important because as we talk about paper ballots, we want to have paper ballots that deliver for voters more confidence. You know, we've had a voting system in place that's been paperless. I think we've had a pretty good run as paperless systems have gone, but I think the public recognizes that the best-in-class technology for voting is a combination of technology with paper so that you have a verifiable, recountable, physically tallyable ballot at the end of the process, that if there's any lack of confidence in machines, you can do a physical manual tally recount, which this would provide us statewide. One thing that we're working towards in this bill is it recognizes that under current law today, it's the duty of the state of Georgia to provide and fund voting equipment and have standardized voting equipment across all 159 counties. Many states around the nation let counties procure it themselves, or there's maybe a list from which they can pick for equipment. We have a standard of a single system across the state, and it is the state's obligation to fund voting equipment. So with that, we're not looking to change that reality. I think we as a state have seen some real success, and states that have taken that same approach have seen the success of consistency across all counties. But what we are looking to do is open the door and make it possible for procurement that we could do something that's not allowable today, which is to have a statewide implementation of a paper ballot system. Whether the process of procurement identifies something where our voters would be filling out bubbles with number 2 pencils, like our absentee ballot process, that could be procured under this, or we could also use a process by which you have electronic ballot markers where people would actually touch a computer screen similar to what we do today, but the primary ballot would then be marked on by the computer that a voter could look at, verify as they held a piece of paper. The people I voted for are reflected on this ballot, and then scan that paper ballot through a scan process where it would be electronically tabulated, but also maintained in physical form if there needed to be a hand physical paper recount of all ballots or some portion of the ballots. So that's what this sets in motion, is the ability to have the guarantee for voters that by a date certain, and that if this General Assembly should fund the process in next session, that, again, subject to funding next session, this would actually be in place for the 2020 presidential primary and then subsequent elections, the 2020 general election. So to make the 2020 general election a paper election, this sets in motion a process that would start later this year, would end up in a procurement next year under the next Secretary of State. So this Secretary of State would start the procurement process. The next Secretary of State would actually make this election. So it's not prejudged to one statewide official having all that power. It'd be, one would advertise, set the criteria with the approval of State Elections Board. The next Secretary of State would actually, based on those criteria, assess and make this election, so that we would have the time to buy the equipment, do the training, and roll this out for a statewide implementation in what is the easiest statewide election to start new equipment with, which is the presidential preference primary. Presidential preference primary, as you can imagine, will be in January or February of 2020. We would have one name on the ballot, presumably, or there might be a ballot question with that, but one name on the ballot, Democrats versus Democrats, Republicans versus Republicans. It's not the general election, so that from a risk management standpoint, we'd be starting with the PPP so that it would be a statewide implementation in a circumstance that's the easiest statewide election to execute, which is the presidential preference primary in 20. So that's the methodology this bill really sets into motion. If I could direct you to page 4 of the bill, it's really lines 109 through 113, where it's reiterated in current code that the technology shall be the same in each county, and that it's the obligation of the state of Georgia to provide funding for that. What this puts in place is that by September 15th of this year, the Secretary of State will have gone through a process that's defined in this bill of public meetings, assessments of cyber risk, fraud prevention best practices, and that the Secretary of State would take that together, put together a series of criteria that would go through and be approved by the bipartisan State Elections Board. So the criteria for selection would be subject to a bipartisan review of an established body that has oversight of the elections process for our state. And then by September 15th, they would be announced and advertised for the respective vendors who could participate in the program. 6 months later, there would be the deadline to have the selection made by March 15th of 2019. So again, the timing is very careful there. If you backwards plan to be able to do this in a consistent, organized way from the presidential preference primary of 2020, we can try to cram this in and do this fast, or we can do this now and do this well. And that's what this proposes to do, is to do it in an organized way that we're not asking vendors to produce $50, $70 million of equipment and roll it out under a short timeline, execute training with people, and then I think we're too good to do that. And I think if we're thoughtful about this, we can set in motion a process that would be consistent with best practices, not just for what we buy, but the process by which we procure it. And that's what I'm wanting to put in place, and what we're trying to put in place with the Senator here with 403. Looking down on the bottom of page 4, lines 129 through 131, this bill authorizes the Secretary of State and the State Elections Board to conduct pilots. Currently under Georgia law, we cannot conduct pilot programs for technology in county, state, or statewide elections. It's only municipal elections we can do that. This would allow the Secretary of State to put pilots in place, whether it's part of the selection process or otherwise. It allows us to remain on the cutting edge as technology emerges. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to spend too much time in details that in many cases in the middle of this bill are largely repeats of existing code. I will tell you on page 11, lines 369 through 371. There's a small text change, but what this does is currently there's a requirement that by the Monday after the election, 6 days after election, the election would have to be certified. What this does is it takes the 6-day window and makes it an 8-day window. gives election officials 2 extra days to certify the election, and the reason for that is that as we try to implement best practices, there are post-election audit measures that are being used across the country to confirm the results in ways that build public confidence. And if we're going to put a duty in place to perform some kind of audit mechanism, I heard both from local officials and the Secretary of State's office that 2 more, as well as verifiable voting advocates, adding 2 days to that process to make sure it's not a rushed process, that it can be done well, would be welcome really by all corners of the conversation. So that's what this does. Mr. Chairman, with that, I will tell you on page 13, lines 417 through 429, actually really 411 through 429, it sets forth a requirement to conduct post-election audits. It doesn't predefine what that is, and there's going to be some debate perhaps today about what we should define in statute and what we can put in place through the rulemaking authority of the State Elections Board. There are many ideas that people may propose to put in statute that I would agree with the underlying practices. The challenge we face is when you think about things like risk-limiting audits, which have been implemented statewide for the first time in Colorado in 2016, it is a very new process. There was pretty good feedback about how things went in Colorado, but it's a very new process for us, and for us to hard code in statute specifics of those best practices, I believe, is a level of granularity that I would caution us from getting into too much detail and predetermining by statute what that looks like. I think many of the practices that will be discussed are good practices, but given the newness of the process and the granularity some would suggest we put in the statute, I would suggest what's in the substitute now is just the right level of detail. What the substitute requires is it requires that there be an audit of some kind, that it happened prior to certifying the vote. So before the vote's certified, there'd be an audit to make sure that the actual ballots match what was tabulated. It ensures that all ballots are part of the process. It wouldn't just be a subset. It wouldn't exclude absentee ballots or provisional ballots. All those would be part of the audit process. It would require reporting. It would require the audit to be done in public view where people can observe what's happening. And then a report would be submitted within 48 hours of completion that's subject to inspection. I believe that's the level of detail this legislature needs to go to in prescribing exactly what that looks like. And I would caution us to go too far in prescribing the granular details, because I think some of those could have some unintended consequences that we could perhaps define if it comes up in discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Thank you so much for that presentation. This is an extremely, no pun intended, technical piece. I want to take this opportunity to thank members of the committee that have endured a lot of interest in this particular bill. And I'm sure if I get ready to mention them by name, but Representative Oliver and Mosby and Chairman Fleming, who chaired this committee, and the 2 Chairman Powell and Blackman, I think, and Brockway, and I'm sure I'm going to miss somebody, but I just really want to tell you thank you. I think the intent was to make sure that we have the secured elections that Georgians demand. There's people on both sides, frankly, that want to think that every machine we've ever been had is hacked, and that's why someone lost or didn't lose. And you know, you try to keep that kind of rhetoric and try to keep public confidence there. But I want to thank all the members of the committee for that. And at this particular time, we're going to open up for questions. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to point you to page 2, lines 48 through 51. Why are we creating a separate definition for scanning ballot? Why don't we just use official ballot or just ballot? Since ballot or official ballot's already defined really well earlier in your bill.
Yeah. When we started this process, there are uses of scanning ballot in the code. And part of this was to not recreate everything from scratch, although there's much new text created here. Currently, the official ballot of Georgia can be paper, can be mechanical, can be electronic. And until we fully implemented this process, and we are fully over into a paper-only circumstance, official ballot is not just paper. Official ballot, again, as you see, today it's electronic, it's mechanical. The old mechanical voting systems we don't use anymore are still legal in the state. That's not being used anywhere. And of course, we use paper for our absentee and provisional ballots. So until ballot is exclusively paper in Georgia, we have to maintain official ballot as something different than scanning ballot, because scanning ballot is just that paper ballot that would be scanned and uniquely paper.
And Representative Turner, for the benefit of the rest of the committee, what is so problematic about that term? Why should that be something that raises a flag, or should it?
Well, the question, and I think the gentleman answered it, was why would you create a separate definition? I think he answered the question.
All right, thank you.
If-
Follow up?
may I?
Yes, please.
Separate question about risk limiting audits. You know, I've provided the members of the committee today 2 handouts. One is an article, I believe came out of USA or the Denver Post, about Colorado's successful risk limiting audit, the first one that they did last year, and how every county passed with flying colors. There's another document, Understanding Risk Limiting Audits, that's for your own reference in case you want to go deeper dive. And then I also, if you really want to get deeper dive, I have a 31-page.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I do, sir. I'm getting there. The question is, sir, what is the minimum risk limit that you're comfortable with?
Appreciate the gentleman's question. Mr. Chairman and Representative Turner, you know, you had offered this as an amendment on HB 848 when it came through before, and I accepted it as a friendly amendment because I'm friendly to the underlying details. However, as I've studied it more, I think we'd be advised not to put that in statute. And I say that because when you study risk limiting audits, and again, they've been done in Colorado starting in 2016. It's a very new practice. We don't have multiple election cycles to learn from and examples. That if we were to hard code in Georgia statute the details of the granularity, percentages of confidence, which could well be written into rule by our Secretary of State and State Elections Board. But for us to hard code that in statute and find that there's no ability to get around that if it creates unintended consequences, I don't think we have a process that's been through multiple election cycles that tells us, that informs us we need to put a 90% degree of confidence in the code. I think it's too early for that. Risk limiting audits are showing promise, but to suggest we know all that could come out of that, we know that if you set a confidence level, we could trigger statewide manual recounts in ways we don't anticipate, don't expect, and perhaps wouldn't want by hard coding that in statute and not giving the State Elections Board and Secretary of State or local election officials the ability to apply common sense. And I don't think risk limiting audits are well enough known and fleshed out to hard code that in statute.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe you answered my question. May I?
All right, your final follow-up question, if he didn't, and I respect your judgment on that, then I'll ask you to make it a more specific and a more specific answer.
Mean, it's whether or not he wants to answer it, frankly. The question is, this is a number. Please put a number on what you believe is an acceptable risk limit for a risk limiting audit.
I'm gonna interrupt there because I understand some of the dynamics he talked. What's your number?
My number is 90%.
Yeah, so therefore, the confidence shouldn't be there if it was at 91%.
No, it would be a minimum of 90%.
But my point is, if you narrow somebody to one specific answer, even your answer would have wiggle room, I would assume, because greater confidence could happen.
Set a floor, yes, sir. It
right.
would set a floor. And so the way risk limiting audits work is that 9 times out of 10 at a 90%, we're catching errors and correcting them. And that's what a risk limiting audit does. And by not setting a risk limit, what we are essentially saying is that we're not setting a risk, we're not even requiring a floor for what the minimum level risk is. There's no point in even conducting an audit if you don't have a predefined limit to what you can tolerate. And so
all right, we're going to let him answer that since you don't believe we have a standard of security.
Representative Turner, I think I'm going to challenge your premise. Your premise is that we have to put a risk limit number in statute to have viable elections with paper ballots. That's simply not true. I believe that I think we are advised to not put it in statute and put it in rule and regulation by the State Elections Board and Secretary of State. I think we would be acting hastily and without, and I think we'd be unwise to hard code that in statute. Even if I agree with your 90 number, which I do, by the way, but I think putting it in statute would be a bad decision.
Representative Fleming, who chaired the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Setzler, I agree with what you've just said, but I just want to make it very clear for the rest of the committee. I have in front of me an amendment, AM 28-1634, about a quarter of a page amendment. As I understand it, that is Representative Turner's amendment, which would do what you and he are discussing about. And I just want to make it very clear, it is your suggestion to us that we not adopt this amendment. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative Fleming. Senator Thompson, want to weigh in here?
Yeah, just briefly, one of the things, Representative Turner, that we discussed on it, if we hard code this in at, say, 90%, and it comes back and we find out real quick we could raise that to 95% or 96% or maybe 99%, that was one of the conversations we had. Our intention, obviously, is to be able to have that, but we don't know what that'll look like.
All right. Representative Oliver. Real quick. Yes, Representative Turner.
I love your language that you had in this when you brought it. My only response is, you said a minimum in yours. If somebody wants to go to 95, they would be able to.
All right, Representative Oliver. Thank you, Representative Turner.
Representative Seltzer, you and I have had a number of conversations about who really makes the decision. And you went through on page 4, lines 108 to 124. I want to make sure I understand. The current Secretary of State will draft the bid process with all the requirements, but the next Secretary of State will choose the vendor by March 15th. The bid process goes out September 15th. The bid and the decision is made March 15th.
That's the way the bill's drafted, yes, ma'am.
My question is it possible or likely that the current Secretary of State in his bid process could so narrowly describe the bid that only 1 or 2 vendors might be eligible in the March 15th deadline? That concerns me.
Appreciate the question, and I want to address it with a change that's been made since the bill was originally filed in its form in 848. Initially, we had the Secretary of State advertising the bid and controlling the whole process. What you see in, and I'll find the line number for you, Representative Oliver. On line 116, not later than September 15, 2018, using selection criteria approved by the State Election Board. We added in the State Election Board approves the criteria because we believe that it ought not be solely a Secretary of State decision. So we put the bipartisan State Election Board in as an approving authority of those selection criteria. And further on lines 119 through 123, added in, and shall conduct public meetings, meet with county officials, cybersecurity concerns, put some meat on the bones of the requirements and criteria determination process so that we could make sure these things are happening. But that State Elections Board piece is an essential element we've added to make sure it's not singularly the Secretary of State's office managing that.
May I ask one follow-up question,
Please.
Mr. Chairman? On line 113, you refer to optical scanning voting system, and that term is defined on line 44. Does that definition exclude the opportunity for the Secretaries of State and the Election Board to choose a paper stylist type voting card where you punch through or write through? Does it exclude that option?
No, it doesn't. If you look at the optical scan voting system, that's the process by which votes are counted by scan. If you look up on line, let me find the
All
best
right, the
place.
answer is no?
Answer's no.
Thank you. Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you share with me a little bit more about the auditing process? It looks like in line 426, in 427, it mentions a manual tally count, but that's not necessarily the audit that would take place initially, and
Thank
there
you.
would be some steps.
Great
to get
question.
that.
What we put in place is something I think is very important to this bill, is that if you do the audit process, in some cases, there's some electronic components to that, in some cases, there could be manual components to that. What we want to make very clear is if there's an electronic tally of the election, i.e. ballots are scanned in and counted electronically, but if there was a recount, and there's a physical count of all the election ballots, and if the electronic count didn't match the physical count would be the actual count. So if, to settle the question, which count's the official count, it says very clearly on 426 through 427, the physical hand count of the ballots would be the official election result.
Thank
which
you,
I think is
Chairman.
consistent with.
Thank you, Chairman Setzler. Chairman J. Powell.
Move the question.
Got to move the question. Have a second to move the question? All right, got plenty of that. All right, somehow I had this feeling. All right. I think, Chairman Setzler, you had referenced earlier to me, and we had a discussion on some potential small amendments of your own.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's go over those real quick.
There should only be one amendment that, if it should please a member to offer, in the spirit of eliminating unintended consequences and candidly leaving to the state elections board.
Is that this one?
That's it.
Okay, let's simplify. All right, the chair's going to entertain them. Got a movement by Chairman Fleming. Do I hear a second? All over the place. We got a movement and a second. Any discussion? Let's take the amendments now. All right, we've got amendment AM 28-1638. Is that right, Chairman Setzler? Oh, I'm sorry.
It should be striking on lines 391 and 396.
Wait a second. 391, 392, 396, and 397?
Yes, sir.
That's your amendment, correct?
It strikes images of each scanning ballot shall, yep.
That's correct.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And that's the Setzler amendment, correct?
I'm not in a position to offer the amendment, but
Okay, I'm
that's
sorry.
one I'm certainly supporting.
But that's
Mr.
the
Chairman.
amendment you support? Representative Brockway is offering that amendment. Do we have a second on that amendment? Second. Got a second. All right, we're going to take this one at a time. All in favor of that amendment to the substitute, signify by saying aye.
Aye. It's 28-16.
Any opposed?
No.
All right, we got one no. Thank you. And any other amendments? All right, great. At this time, I will enter.
Yes.
I knew that was coming. You're a little slow, say, and you got mad at me.
The speed at which you move, sir, it is amazing. It's something to watch. But I'd like to move for the inclusion of AM 281634, which reestablishes the 90% limit for risk limiting audits, as the author of the Senate bill originally had in there.
All right, we have an amendment. Do we have a second on the Turner amendment?
I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we got is the author in the Senate, the House presenting today, are they agreeable to that amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask,
You knew that question was coming.
I would ask members to vote this down.
Okay.
I agree the underlying policy, but it should not be in statute.
All right, all in favor of the Turner amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign.
No.
All right, this is going to be one, y'all take notes.
Division, Mr.
This is going to be a division, it's not asked for by, those against the Turner amendment, or in support of, let's do it that way, in support of the Turner amendment, sorry, Representative Oliver, please raise your hand. 1, 2. I've got 2. I really thought I heard it more than that too. All right, the Turner is defeated. So we've got
Nobody voted against yet.
the substitute as amended to House Bill 403. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
If I could ask a question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Representative Brockway.
Earlier today, and I just, for a clarification, AM 28-1636 was something that Chairman Setzler had asked me to introduce at the appropriate time, and I just wanted to make sure, did we deal with this amendment or not?
We did not. I
Okay.
thought you were going to offer that as the Brockway amendment.
All
so.
right, yes, sir.
Okay,
I'd-
so
I'd
we've
like
got
to offer
another,
that.
we've got another amendment.
Yes,
The 38, we do not have that one?
it's AM 28-1636, Mr. Chairman.
All right, you got them right. All right. Sidney Jean. Can you take half of these and start them on one end? Has she got them all? Don't worry about it, Craig. Let her do it.
AM 281636.
Take one and pass it down that way. And briefly, if you would, Representative Brockway, explain what this one does.
It is, in my conversation with Chairman Setzler, we had a lot of discussion in subcommittee about in risk limiting audits, which do you do a manual review of paper or do you not, and so forth. And so this is an attempt to clarify that and strike a middle ground. And if Chairman Setzler could comment further, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Make sure this is properly drafted.
I trust Legislative Council.
Yeah. What this does, what all this adds, Mr. Chairman, is lines 3 and 4. It had initially been drafted is that every single audit, not risk limiting or otherwise, would only happen by use of the physical ballots. There's a lot of electronic means that can streamline, as well as allow us to audit more election contests than just one or two. So it would have mandated 100% of audits would have been with paper ballots. We pulled that out in subcommittee yesterday, and someone came to me and said, well, you've taken it from 100 to 0. What this does is it requires that some component, something more than 0, would use the paper. So if you believe paper ought to be part of some part of the audit process, this ensures it's part of some part. That would be defined by State Elections Board. But it does guarantee we wouldn't have
all or nothing.
All or nothing, yes, sir.
Thank you so much. All right. All right. And you're in favor of this Brockway amendment as authors of the bill,
That's
okay?
fair balance, Mr. Chairman.
Then we've got do I hear a motion on the Brockway bill to pass?
Move to pass.
Got a move to pass. Do I have a second? Any discussion? Great. All those in favor of the Brockway amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. I love unanimous bipartisanship. All right, so now we've got the substitute as amended to Senate Bill 403. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign.
No.
Ayes clearly have it. Not recognized for that purpose this time, just because we're getting into the situation where we're doing it with 2 votes. Thank you. Let me find the agenda. We got one more here? Thank you.
Is that accurate? I can say that?
Very true.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Senator Watson. Have you enjoyed listening to Governmental Affairs this afternoon?
Back.
Well, we're fixing Senate bills, you noticed.
We require a lot of fixing.
All right, members of the committee, this is Senate Bill 397. Should be fairly simple. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I bring you Senate Bill 397. Simply put, this allows cities to exercise what the state does now. The city now has the option to use their own request for proposals for property to be sold, and it allows auctioneers. This just gives them the ability to have real estate agents to help out in the process, or to use real estate agents in the process. That's basically what it does. We discussed this thoroughly in the subcommittee, but I am certainly happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Move to pass, sir.
You got a move to pass. Is that a question? You got a motion there?
It's
Did you say motion?
A question.
All right, go ahead with your quick question.
Senator, I was approached by folks at ACCG who are very supportive of your bill and would like to see the same provision applied to counties as well. And I guess we're talking about different code sections here that deal with municipalities and deal with So I don't, I guess I don't really know, have an
I
answer
can,
to
I
how
can,
to
I
help
can,
them.
and
how to
Chairman
help them
Reinders,
accomplish
I've talked to ACCG, GMA, and this was brought by the city of Savannah.
Right.
Everybody's in full agreement. We certainly like to have them marching in step.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, I talked to them a couple days ago, and they said they were neutral on it. I go, no, this, you should be in favor, this helps you too. But is there a quick fix to include them?
It is being drawn up as we speak, unfortunately, because it's in a different code section. We didn't have a substitute ready. If you certainly have one, I'm certainly amenable to that. I was going to proceed and.
We don't.
I-
But there, it wasn't at the exclusion. We tried to partner with them a couple days ago is the point, and it's, so, all right, we've got a motion. Do pass and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, like sign. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Representative Fleming. I haven't decided. Senator Jackson, you prepared to do this resolution without any amendments?
I am, sir.
You are, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
This
committee.
may be a hearing. We'll kind of decide or vote. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I present to you Senate Resolution 685. Members of the committee, this is a resolution to change the name of Runaway Negro Creek, which was not the original name. It had a similar name given to it in the late 1800s. This resolution is to change the name to Freedom Creek. The name Freedom Creek is the name of such creek should be changed by, if this committee approves, it reflects the state's commitment to freedom and the inalienable rights of men and women who pursue it in this great state. This is not a name-changing bill. I'd like you to know that. This is just a resolution to notify the Division of Archives and History of the University Systems to notify the U.S. Board of Geographic Names that this action should take place. This is just a request to the National Geographic Society to change the name to Freedom Creek. A very simple resolution, Mr. Chairman, and I urge this committee's approval.
I had a 17 on. Representative Mosby.
At the proper time, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We need to get that, you need to get another seat or get a. Listen, I wouldn't, but I'd check to my immediate right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Push your button. Push your button.
Yeah, it's not like that.
It's good.
I do have a friendly amendment. Would you consider accepting? And the chairman as well.
Which means you just told the chairman one thing, you're gonna do something else now.
With the chairman's approval.
No, no amendments to this.
Is there a specific reason there's no amendments to this?
Yes, discretion of the chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I just want to go on the record that there are a bunch of us that want to offer an amendment.
I understand, but we're not gonna skin a cat unless we run it by the chair, right?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Speak with disappointment.
I understand. And not that some of that disappointment isn't shared. But you need to play nice in the sandbox. What you want to do?
I would like to proceed, I'd like to proceed, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We got a motion from Representative Mosby. Do pass? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
We're adjourned. Thank you, y'all.